Okay, so we're
And we
back.
are live on Twitch. Hey, welcome to Against the Narrative. I have my brother Solomon here, and we're gonna have an interesting conversation. We decided to go live today, and I'm gonna let him drive for the beginning of the conversation, and we're gonna have something interesting to bring to the table for you all.
Hopefully, I guess we're gonna find out. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the subject object dichotomy. I'm gonna riff on this for a few minutes. Hopefully, it'll make some sort of sense, and I'll try to frame the following discussion in terms of a question that hopefully can give us a little bit of organization. So, subject object dichotomy goes by many names: the mind matter problem, the mind body problem, or you could think of it as the soul and the body. But for many people, there's this intuitive understanding that reality can be separated into the subjective, which is what's in my mind, what's in my psyche, or my spirit or my soul. And then there's the objective, which is the external world. It's that which is outside of my mind. It's that which is stable across many observing minds. And that dichotomy is useful in many respects. We can thank this framework, the mind matter distinction, for a lot of the scientific and technological progress that has occurred. But part of what I want to explore is just the reality or the metaphysical substrate of that way of viewing the world. Like, is it useful to differentiate between the body and the mind? What does it mean to think of consciousness as something that somehow comes from the brain, which in our framework would come from an objective physical substrate, but at the same time is distinct from it? So that's kind of the question that I'm aiming at. That's how it's working in my mind. Is, yeah, how useful is it to think of reality in terms of a subjective mind that is different from an objective external world?
So the phrase that comes to mind when I bring up this topic, or when you bring up this topic to me, is to be in the world but not of it. And so there's this subconscious understanding in a lot of, like, I think that's actually a religious thing. I think that's a Christian quote from the Bible. I'm not sure. That's what everybody's option made. The idea of, like, to be in the world but not of it. It's like I'm a divine being in an unclean world. This concept here. And so the concept is the divinity of it is your own personal psychology around it. It's your personal mind. It's your spirit. It's your soul in the mix of this. And then this idea that the world around you has no regard for how clean your soul may or may not be and how you want to interact with it. And so you have to realize that no matter how good your intentions are, the world around you is going to react based off of its own set of rules. And that's kind of what that logic I think is important, and how it works in the metaphysics is understanding, like, no matter how great the intention or your imagination, so like understanding that magic is imagination. And so your ability to create these ideas for how the world works and this psychology for how the world works in your mind, and that gives you the encouraging mindset, or the will to want to live and do the things that you do. And with that, you have to understand, though, that no matter how what world you paint in your mind, there will be moments where that reality is broken by the actuality of the objective world that doesn't know that paradigm or isn't forced to it unless you set it up in a certain way for you to live in it. And so there's this aspect that there's two elements to manifestation in my mind, is that there's the creation of the idea internally and the will to want to do it, and then there's the actual structuring of it in your reality for it to be possible for you to live within that paradigm.
So it seems to me that everything you just said was within the subject object dichotomy, like within the framework. And part of what I understood you to say is it's useful to not make what happens in the world personal at times.
Definitely, because if you take, and then that goes to the attachment of it. So if you have this ego or this idea of yourself that you're attached to, and the world rejects it, you now are upset of or victim to the world. You're now ostracized by the world, the society that you live in, and that can be a detriment to your ability to grow, because it may just be that you didn't present what you wanted in a way that people could understand it because of your idea of how it looks compared to the actuality of how it looks in everybody else's objective reality. And so this becomes the confusion here, is that we believe that everybody sees the outside reality the same. But if everybody has a lens of their personal reality over the objective reality, then nobody's looking at the same thing. And so that miscommunication that people have in conversations and in moving through the world is what causes war and anger and hate and envy and jealousy and insecurity, because you, at some point in the time as a child, had a great view of how the world worked and you were happy about it, and the world rejected that, and you haven't known how to recover from that and deal with it in a cohesive way.
I think one of the issues I have with the subject object dichotomy, and it might not necessarily be the dichotomy itself, I think it's how people use it, is that people often give more credence to the objective side of that dichotomy and they de emphasize the subjective. And I think the technical way of saying this is that they give the objective world a more or a higher ontological status compared to the subjective reality. And you hear this in how people talk about facts or how people talk about their perspectives in the media or in politics. You know, they say, I want the objective facts. I want to be unbiased. And if someone makes a claim, they'll just say often, well, that's just your subjective opinion. It doesn't mean anything. It's not the truth. You know, we come to associate the objective world with the only reality. And then we associate that notion with the objective world as being truer or the only truth. And in that instance, I think that we can hinder ourselves as we make that move to discount the subjective experience that I would say plays a major role in guiding behavior. You know, like it's like, are your emotions objective in a sense? It's like, I mean, kind of. You can understand them from a biological standpoint, you can understand them from a neurological standpoint, yes, but the experience of anxiety is different than the, let's say, chemical dynamics that occur in your brain to make the experience manifest. It's like the experience has its own reality that is arguably more important than the biological. So yeah, that's something that I've been wrestling with, is how do we balance these two realities and make sure we're not becoming too one-sided.
I think the issue that we have here is piggybacking off of what I was saying earlier, and you brought up a great point with what you're saying, is that the result of someone's reality being rejected is a trauma that they deal with. And so the oppressed becomes the oppressor in this mindset here. That the idea that because your reality was rejected, you reject others' reality. And now you've decided that the only reality that's valuable is the objective reality. You've now dissociated from your subjective reality in a way. This is what we talk about with the inner childhood wounds and things of that nature, where a person has rejected the reality that they came into the world with, that they're supposed to be sharing and propagating as a part of their psychological nature, for this objective reality that is easier to communicate in society. And so what you realize is, to me, I feel like it's all subjugated by this idea that I want to be a part of reality and community. In order to be a part of community, I have to deal with objective reality, because if I deal with subjective reality, people are going to think I'm a little cuckoo. Because everybody has decided to reject their objective reality because it's not logical, because no one understands it. And it's not that they don't understand it, but I believe we don't take the personal time to know ourselves well enough to communicate our subjective realities in a way that's actually contributing to society. And this is what I think is called the inner work. Like, do you understand who you are and what you want to do with yourself well enough? Like, this is something I literally was just talking to Claude with this about this. Is I have this science where the body is hermetically sealed. So in order to know yourself, you need to understand yourself in 7 different sciences. Once you understand your soul self, you can then figure out 7 different ways of expressing that, so you have a holistic view of interpreting yourself and expressing yourself. To me, I created this science because I realized that people, one, didn't know themselves deep enough, and then if they did know themselves, they had issues with expressing themselves because they only had a one outlet for doing that. And so building out this entire structure for people to have a positive way of understanding the self and expressing the self, I believe would put people in a place of balance to where they could operate more holistically. And so that's my answer to that. I do understand that it's a problem with how we treat each other's emotional sides. We're not very empathic to other people's emotional systems because the reality and the money and the bills and the this and the that and that and that keeps us from really being able to realistically give that the time that it needs.
Yeah, and I also think that having a better understanding of the world that's more comprehensive than only the subject object dichotomy will help in that regard, in terms of helping people understand themselves and then helping them understand other people. And so, for example, with the subject object dichotomy, it's easy to think of man as a conscious mind that's in a physical body, and the body is what is objective, and the mind, the psyche, consciousness, those are secondary products of physical processes. And again, if you believe that the objective reality is more real than the subjective reality, well, then you kind of reduce the human being to, I guess, a set of deterministic forces or elements, such as whatever the physical things are you want to highlight, the atoms or the quantum particles or the electrons or whatever it is. And I think that's one avenue towards nihilism, but I think it's also just kind of cynical. And you know when you elevate the objective nature of humans and then make that move into determinism, that then opens up a lot of pathways towards, well, what do you do about responsibility then? What do you do about agency? Like, if where does that all come into play? And another thing I would say is that there's two ways I could go. I'm trying to figure out which way I want to go. You mentioned like 7 sciences for understanding the individual, for understanding humans. I agree with just the idea that human beings exist in levels, or we exist in layers. You said 7. This other philosophical framework came to mind that splits human beings essentially into what are 5 patterns. And this comes from Robert Pirsig, is a philosopher. And he says that the starting point isn't necessarily the subject object dichotomy. He says that the starting point is quality. And other terms for quality he uses are experience or value. And he says from value, you then get change or not change. And this could be chaos and order, to use some of our earlier language. And then within order, within things that are permanent, you have inorganic patterns, you have organic patterns, social patterns, and psychological or intellectual patterns. And you then split the inorganic and organic into, that's like the objective world, and then the, what did I say? The social and the psychological realms are the subjective. And so for him, in his philosophy, or his metaphysics of quality is what he calls it, the subject object dichotomy doesn't come till way later. Like, you first have to view yourself as a being of value, or as a thing that experiences, right? And then he says, well, again, the first dichotomy is some things change, and some things don't change. And in order to know which things don't change, you have to compare it with things that change. And so there's that mutual reciprocity that you can't get outside of. And then that's when you can start talking about the subject object dichotomy. So all of that to say that I agree that there are levels to human beings and that there are other frameworks that don't necessarily get rid of the subject object dichotomy, but can maybe just be a better framework for thinking about ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing.
I lost your. I can't hear you. I don't know if you're still.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We'll see how long this mic lasts. If not, I'll just end up using Discord audio or something. But so basically what I was gonna say is that um what you end up realizing is that a lot of the times that is the real work that we're doing is how do we figure out how to um best position all of these different perceptions. Like, so that's why I like using the concept of lenses. I believe everything is a lens. Like all these different philosophies, psychology, state of being, they're different lenses. And so certain lenses reveal certain things about different situations. And so our ability to know what lens to analyze a different situation in, that's going to be the determining factor of how well our system is. This is where the whole quantum thinking thing comes in. I think of it like math. You remember in math where they gave you the formula sheet for a test, and you had to know which formula needed to go for which math problem, which formula, and the thing. This is, and then let's look at it this way: the way that you unpack these problems in my head. This is why I was great at math. I didn't learn any of this. None of this was memorized. The idea here is that each one of these formulas needs certain information in order for me to work with it. So I can look at the problem and figure out based off the problem what parts it has. That tells me what formula I can use on that problem. This is the same way I look at psychological principles and metaphysical principles. What archetypes are at play in this situation? Based on the archetypes that are at play, I know what either mythology, what practice, or what magic principle has these elements that are in play in the situation that I'm looking at, and I can use that to better analyze it. We can do the same thing with psychological states. What type of people are here? What information do I have about the situation? Do I have more subjective information? Do I have more objective information? Based off of that principle, I can balance that with what I don't have in the situation. Say if it's very objective, oh well, I can implement some of the subjective information that's needed to better understand it because I may not have everything in the objective side. Or if I have everything in the objective side, I may not need as much subjective input in that situation because it may bug out the clarity. And say if I have a very subjective thing and there's not a lot of objective information, then it's best to use the subjective information. So it's like just being able to understand how to adjust how you respond to a situation based off the information that's at play. That's just the game. That's going to be the game that I push for most of this because it just makes everything make the most sense. And so the idea here is being familiar with as many systems as you can. It's not saying you need to know everything, but the more systems that you understand, the easier you can operate. That's why 7 systems is important. It's not about just knowing about yourself, but in order to understand yourself in these 7 systems, you have to understand these 7 systems. So let's put it this way. So I like the number 7 because it gives you 3 spiritual sciences, 3 biological sciences, and then 1 personal passion. So like for me, dance is something that I can translate myself through. I understand how to speak in dance. That's a personal passion. Then I have astrology, numerology, and human design are my 3 astral sciences. And then I can go into like a biology, a psychology, or a sociology to understand myself as a person. And so this gives you a holistic view, but also in the span of getting this understanding, you're learning these sciences in a way that you can use them to understand situations as well. So it's giving you that real holistic view there.
It's very useful to think of concepts or frameworks as tools. And
Yep.
when you're presented with a problem, essentially the meta problem or like the primordial problem is always what kind of problem is this?
Yep.
And as you are navigating that landscape and figuring out what kind of problem it is, hopefully what becomes self-evident is the tool or the set of tools that you need. And so I agree with everything you just said. And in psychology particularly, this is something that I felt like I didn't really get at my graduate school when I got a master's. Many intellectuals want to focus on specialization in whatever field. It could be in physics, it could be in psychology, it could be in math or the humanities. And again, this was my personal experience in psychology. Everyone was like, okay, what population do you want to work with? Or what discipline do you want to be? Traditional Freudian, or do you want to be more like Carl Rogers, or take more of a behaviorist standpoint? And my inclination was always, well, how about I develop like an 80% mastery in all of them? That way I have these tools in my toolkit for the various clients that I might encounter. And I don't know, it always bothered me that someone didn't see it that way. And that sounds very arrogant, but I don't know. I tend to want to be more of a generalist, but like I said, I think there's something to be said about getting to an 80% proficiency and then pivoting to something else rather than spending the additional, from my view, unnecessary time that it would take to actually specialize and get to that 100% proficiency. And there's probably something like a Pareto distribution there, right? Where it's like, 20% of your time studying a subject might be able to get you to 80% proficiency, because there's just the way many disciplines are organized, there are some common ideas that keep repeating themselves. And so once you get these basic axioms, it's like you can figure out a lot of it from there. But then to truly specialize and to become like an expert master, 1% of the 1%, you need to spend the remaining 80% of the time to get that remaining 20% of proficiency. And in my opinion, I'm just like, nah, I could spend that time getting different lenses through which to view problems. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think what it is for me, I call it circling the square. Is my mindset about that? It's like, all right, if I can understand all the archetypal principles around this, like you said, this 20% core that takes the most time. By the time I've circled everything around it, I know what's not what I don't understand. That piece that I don't understand is the rest of the puzzle, right? And so, but it becomes easier to unpack that middle area because I understand everything that it's not. And so I believe in my mindset that if you focus on understanding what's already known first, the journey to what's unknown is a little faster. And so that's kind of the logic that I took with it is I spent my first couple of years when I got into metaphysics just like I don't really want to put any idea out there. What does everybody think they know? All right, based off of what everybody thinks they know, this is what I feel like makes sense. I want to work with that tool set to dig into the deeper. And so now, I think what it is like understanding that 20% is only hard to dig through because you're only allowed to work through it one way. But if you have the entire circumference of it, you can now work it like a maze. You can turn where you need to turn. You can dive where you need to dive. You can back where you need to back and pick up another concept that better navigates that area. And that's the point of having this tool set is it's like I'm not running into problems where it's like, well, I can't do that because my philosophy from seeing your philosophy dies here. And that's another thing that people have a hard time accepting. That for every philosophy can't get to the center. There's only one philosophy that works. There's actually only one thing that actually is the truth. That's the part we have a hard time accepting. And if we can accept that there's only one thing that gets to the truth, everything that gets to a stopping point at some point, maybe it's just not. Like, so this idea of the 4 to 5, right? If it's love or not love. If we're getting to the point where you have to go, there's only, so the idea that getting to God or getting out of this idea, like there's this concept of leaving this reality requires you to get out of a very, very, very tiny hole. The reference here is that you have to be you can't be dense. You can't be carrying a lot when you go through or leave this reality. In order to go to the next level, there's only one very, very tiny hole. Even with the whole idea of the firmament, Yeah, the firmament is supposed to be impenetrable, but there's holes in it if you know how to get out of it. These holes, these leaks, this pathway, this secret tunnel through the self, through love, is supposedly the answer here. If that's the truth, we have to accept that most of the philosophies we have are wrong. And we have to be able to figure out how to navigate that. And to me, that's really what I realized, that everybody wants their teacher, their philosophy to be the right one. I have no attachment to any of these philosophies. I don't care who's right or wrong. All I want to know is what's the actual way. And we won't get that attached to someone's ideas that aren't the truth.
And okay, you gave me a lot of questions. One question is, how did you get to that point of, let's say, separation, right? Because there's a famous German philosopher, Nietzsche, who criticized many philosophers during his time. This is like, let's say, the late 1800s, for exactly what you were saying. He basically believed that many pseudo philosophers started to fall in love with their own ideas. And so they stopped seeking truth because it's as if they would fall in love with their ideas, and then the lens that they adopted to view their own ideas was a supposedly objective lens. And so they kind of cut themselves off from, let's say, the redeeming power of the truth to correct your knowledge. And I would say in many disciplines that still is occurring. And thus, when you read through various publications or you just try to tap into what people think, like you were saying, majority of it is wrong. I think even within psychology, this might be different now, but at least 10 years ago, there was what was called a replication crisis. And so whenever you're producing scientific work, one of the hallmarks that what you have found is credible is its ability to be replicated in the future by the same lab, or ideally a better lab using different procedures. And what was found is that I think it was majority of psychological papers failed the replication test. And so it's like, what? So what was happening there? Like, what's going on? And I don't want to be too cynical. It's very difficult to do science, particularly if you're trying to do it correctly. And so, and I'm also not a psychologist. I'm not a scientist. So like, I'm not trying to be too critical. But to your point, it's like, what is the proper process of trying to thread that needle, trying to go through those tight conditions? And so going back to my first question, how did you arrive at that, let's say, starting principle of this pragmatic detachment from ideas? I hope that makes sense.
I was a extremely intelligent child. Intelligent enough to be smarter than most people around me. Not in the sense that I was just, oh God, I do everything, but I generally had a better understanding of how, maybe just to communicate at an early age. And it got me to the point of realizing that people couldn't defend the things that they said. A lot of people make claims without even knowing where the information came from or who taught it or whether or not it was true or not. And they base their lives off of ideas that they don't truly understand. And that to me was troubling. I'm not going to ride or die for some shit that I can't explain to you. And I realized that taught me as an early age that there was a psychological attachment to ideas that was unhealthy. And be honest with you, I got it from the church. Y'all believe all of this stuff and y'all don't even do it. And y'all are living and dying about this. And y'all don't even try to do it for real. Y'all don't even know if it works. You've never fucking done it in your life. And you will die about this. And that's psychotic to me. So I always told myself that I wasn't going to be attached to an idea in a way that wouldn't allow me to see what was going on. It was a trauma response. Honestly, I was traumatized by the fact that people would die about ideas they didn't understand. So one, I wanted understanding, and two, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't attached to nothing that wouldn't allow me to see something that was better. People can't even grow because they're so attached to their idea of the way they think things work, and then they don't even understand that well. So what are we doing? Like, it's I believe that a lot of people live in a state of psychosis and aren't aware of it, and that's really the truth about it. I think people are crazy, and I just people are like, oh, why, how do you do it? I'm not psychotic. What are we talking about? I'm not a psychopath. That's it. That's the secret. I'm not psychotic. I'm actually paying attention. I'm here dealing with the bullshit consciously. I'm not running away from my problems. I actually see what's going on. And that allows me to think in a way that's actually logical. And I'm not just putting some rose colored glasses over it and trying to act like everything's okay. That's the difference. Like, I think I just actually face my problems, and I do it in a way that allows for me to be realistic about what's going on. Some people would get into my mindset and be depressed. Though, like, I've introduced people to the way that I think, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's depressing," and I'm like, "No, it's reality. It's what we're actually dealing with," and being able to navigate that logically and having the mental and emotional intelligence to look at the world for what it is what I thought being an adult was. I was very disappointed when I became an adult and realized that nobody actually was dealing with what was going on. I thought like adults had it figured out and they were working on it. And no, we're not. They are, but like you said, like what is if we look at most of the studies on psychology and they can all be disproven, what have we been doing for the last 50 years? What are we doing?
Yeah. And I guess to give credence to the other side of the argument, it's as if, let's say, arbitrarily 5% of our scientific endeavor is correct. Well, it's got us pretty far. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it
man.
might
But
be
imagine
that
if it was like we imagine if we weren't allowing people to like propagate bullshit because of their ego. How much further could we be if we were actually getting rid of the things that didn't work?
it, I've heard this idea somewhere else. Like it might be that the rate at which we're going is, let me put it this way, there are trade-offs either way. Moving too
Yeah, I agree.
slow, people suffer. Moving too fast, people suffer. And so,
Yeah, because the psychological strain it would take for people to adjust that fast, everybody doesn't have the fortitude for it. A lot of people would go insane if their ideas didn't hold up long enough. I understand that there is a. So I'm gonna tell you something that I realized, and I got into all of this information. It was like, well, why don't you go tell everybody? Well, you don't. This is the whole Matrix thing. You don't want to unplug somebody that don't want to be unplugged. It just don't work out well. You become the villain in this situation 80% of the time. And so there's just this realization that people have to want this change. They have to want to accept these new ideas and perceptions of the reality. And unfortunately, most people don't. Most people like their white lies. That's the reality in the society that we live in. And the ability to navigate that with a sense of self still is really the battle that most people are fighting.
okay, so look, there's this psychology experiment that I want to tell you, and then I want to maybe tie it back to the subject object dichotomy. So, this experiment was called the invisible gorilla experiment, and I believe the lead researcher was Dan Simons. And what he does is that he takes a group of people into a room and he has them watch a video. And on the video, there's a group of people wearing a black shirt and a group of people wearing a white shirt, and there's two basketballs, so two basketball teams. The black team's passing the basketball back and forth, and so is the white team, and they're all intermingling, and so you get these black and white players going back and forth. And the job of the subject is to count the number of times the black team passes the basketball back and forth. And so they do this, time goes on. The researcher asks the subject, okay, how many times did the black team pass the basketball? They'll give the answer, they'll give the correct answer, and the researcher will say, okay, good job. Now, did you see the invisible gorilla? And a substantial number of subjects will say, no, I didn't see the gorilla. And then they rewind the video, and now you see the gorilla walking out into the middle of the teams as they're passing the basketball back and forth. He like sits there for a little bit, and then he walks off. And this experiment has been repeated with different phenomenon, like instead of in a room, the player's on a stage, and then like the curtains change color. There's all these different things that the individuals don't perceive. So the point of that experiment is to show that we ignore most of the world. There are many things that we just don't see. And going back to the subject object dichotomy, one question is like, well, what does that mean for objective reality if people don't see it? You know, like if there's only so much reality that we can perceive, what does that mean about the unperceived reality? Like, is it still reality? Now, you and I would say that, well, it's probably best to think of reality as latent potential. It's like latent potential that becomes information when a conscious observer comes and constructs their experience, right? But I think that's different from the subject object dichotomy, because then it's not there's an objective reality and a subjective mind. It's like, no, reality is the intermingling of both of these entities. Um, Now, I wanted that to relate that back to something you said before about gosh, I think I lost it. But I felt like you were saying something about there's just these different ways of viewing the world and how we see it and how we're trying to figure out which lens is correct and
I can pick up there if you need me
pick
to.
it up.
Okay, and so what I want to say is that what I like about what you did there is it brings up an important point. I think a lot of people, especially I hear this in psychology a lot, is there's this idea that the world, if I'm gonna tell you what gave me a lot of peace of mind. And I only found this peace of mind high as shit after a trip, laying in my bed as I came back to my reality. There's this idea that we believe the world around us will stop if we're not taking part in it. That's the illusion here. The objective reality don't give a fuck about us. The planet, the whole earth is gonna be here, whether we're here or not. There is a part of there's an aspect of the objective reality that is natural, and we don't account for that well in our understanding of the reality. And so we believe that if I seen something, I seen everything that was going on. Well, no, you didn't. You didn't see anything on a microscopic level that was going on. That wasn't even a part of your perception, but there's a lot going on. You don't even understand what it takes for you to perceive the reality that's going on. So there's a layer of this objective reality that's outside of our scope of understanding and our scope of senses, honestly. And so with that understanding, we have to realize that the objective reality isn't, this comes with the whole, oh, our mind projects our reality or whatever. This whole song and dance that we deal with that doesn't allow for us to just accept that there's something spiritual at play. There's some other element, ether, spirit, God, whatever you want to call it. There's something structuring this. That's the whole churning element to me. This whole idea that this bubble that we call reality, the universe, the galaxies, all of this that we're in, this super metaphysical reality, this super physical reality, this objective reality is its own thing. It exists outside of us in some way. And us trying to understand that relationship, I think, is what is a big human problem, is we don't understand how we're positioned in that, and that makes it hard for us to ground into reality well.
So it sounded like part of what you did there was you started with the objective reality and then asked the question, how does human consciousness fit into that? Is that part of
How
what you
does this
did?
objective reality fit into the objective reality? Where is it positioned?
Oh, okay. I think we should spend some time here. I think that's good. That's good because I think so. With that question, there are assumptions that undergird it, right? This is the metaphysics, the philosophy here, right? Is it safe that you presupposed the objective reality as being more real than the subjective reality? Is that, correct me if I'm wrong?
I believe the objective reality is the plane that the subjective reality exists in.
Okay. So what what if I said the opposite? What if I put forward the opposite? You know, the idea that, let's say, going back to Genesis, where God created the earth, or let's say habitable order, from the void, from emptiness, from chaos, from no thing, right? From nothing. And so God is portrayed as the force that creates order out of chaos, and then man and woman are made in that image.
I didn't say that the objective reality came first. I said that this objective reality holds this subjective reality. So this is the concept here. The subjective reality is what we understand to be God. God created the world and then he breathed life into the world. So the objective reality is the creation of the subjective reality in order to become a receiver for its consciousness for it to move around in. So the subjective reality is the objective reality is a radio receiver for the subjective reality. What am I saying? Your body is a receiver for your soul. So your subjective reality resists within an objective suit that is made for it to be able to experience itself in.
I think part of what I heard you do there was create a reciprocal cycle there, where,
This is the fourth dimension.
and I think what I agree with that move. I think I just wonder if subject and object are the right words, or are the right way of thinking about that. You know, like, so you said the objective world holds the subjective world, or the objective world holds subjective experience. Is that what you said?
The objective world is a receiver for the subjective world. It's what structure it's what allows the subjective world to have form. You see what I'm saying? And so what we're talking about here is the idea, like when we look at the tree of life, like, okay, so God created the mother. The mother created the world. The world, you see what I'm saying? So the world is this objective reality. And then the mother's children exist within this world. So their spirits, the soul of the mother, her pieces, her fragments, are inserted into this world to exist within containers inside of this thing. You see what I'm saying?
I,
And so the idea here is this is talking about how the cosmology is structured. So if so, this is the whole idea of God breathing into the body. Like he fashioned the human being, and he put breath into the body. The breath is that subjective piece. That's the Holy Spirit. That's the inner soul. That's the inner world. That's the soul. That's the soul seat. This is Tiamat. I mean, this is Tiferet within your body. You see what I'm saying? This is the part that connects you to the subjective reality. And in general, because your body, your mind, like you said earlier, the mind, the heart, the body is the processor for the subjective frequency. It rationalizes it for a way in a way for us to channel it. And so the idea is when you die, that subjective frequency returns to its source to deliver that information that you got from this subjective experience.
everything but that last part. I think I followed you. I followed you. So, like, I don't know if you would call that reincarnation.
Basically,
Okay,
you return to that same energy and then it's fragmented back into a different suit.
I'm
And you could
gonna.
argue that there's a layer there that flips them before it goes back to, if it doesn't get a certain amount, if it's not a full experience and it's put back into the system. That would be the reincarnation loop. Oh, you didn't accrue enough karma or dharma or whatever. I believe there's like a credit system, and that you have to pass the credit score test to go back.
I okay.
You haven't learned enough.
I'm gonna separate off reincarnation because I'm just not
That's a whole other ball
familiar
game.
enough with the metaphysics of reincarnation. I can't speak on that too much. But one of the things I think you alluded to before that, so you said, so God, mother, world, or God, mother,
Creation.
children.
Well, God, well, technically it would be God, mother, form. And so form would be the masculine. So the mother is considered the feminine, the spirit, the mind, the soul, and then the masculine is considered the father, the body, the structure we live in. That's the same thing when I say like the mother planet and then the masculine world that we live in. This is the same structure that plays out that way as well.
You
So
see,
the planet is considered feminine, and then the world we live in, the patriarchy, is considered masculine.
you see.
And
So let me throw logos in there though too. my understanding of logos is my understanding is that one way to think of logos from the Judeo-Christian standpoint is as the creative word, the thing, the creative force that gives form. And I'm trying to tie that in there because
That would be that would so like okay, so you look at the tree of life, right? It's a triangle at the top. The logos would be the strip between the mother and the father. It would be the energy that creates the form.
okay, okay, I think I'm fine with that. Now I want to add back in the idea that humans are made in the image of God, though. So I understand that you can have the mother and the father there, the masculine and the feminine. Then you added, logos in between. But I guess I'm trying to maybe put forward the idea that in human beings there's this divinity, I guess, that transcends the subject object dichotomy, and it's represented in Genesis by saying that we are made in the image of God, and God being the source of, let's say, subject and object.
Okay, so let's put it this way. So the objective reality would be your physical reality, right?
Sure.
The subjective reality would be your mindset about that reality. That would be the mind. So there has to be a third element here. So the way that you're made in God is you have the outside, which is the masculine. You have the internal, which is the feminine, and then you have a soul, or the thing that's sending the signal to the body. That's, you see what I'm saying? So the idea here is that the body, the subjective reality, as we understand it, is the interpretation of this energy. So there's a spot when you're inside of your physicality where this energy comes in, which is the source of it, the uninterpreted. This is what we consider the heart. This is why the heart and the mind are separated in metaphysical practices, because technically the heart has brain neurons in it too. And the heart's brain neurons pick up faster than what the brain neurons pick up in the physicality. So what we're saying here is that the heart, going by your heart, this is why we talk about always judging things by your heart, not your mind. Your heart picks up the signal first and has an uninterpreted version of this signal. That's the third piece. So you have the outside, you have the outside, the mind. So you have the body, the mind, and the heart. This is the way it's perceived. So the body is the outternal, the external, the objective reality. The subjective would be the mind, the internal, and then the spiritual, or the third element that we ignore, would be the heart or the soul signal that comes in and has all of it. This is why Tiferet, when you put this tree of life over the body, is positioned at the heart. And so this is how that all unpacks. The problem is that we ignore the spiritual element, so we can't have a definition for it.
Yeah, and but it sounds like part of what you did there, you used the heart as something other than the objective physical component, but the heart is part of the body.
It's a receiver.
Uh-huh. But it's also part of the body.
So put it this way: when your body is formed, the first thing that comes together is the heart. Before the body is full, the heart is receiving the signal. This is the concept here. So it's not saying that the heart. So you're made in God's image, right? So it has to be within your physicality. That's why I'm framing it that way. That's how you're made in His image. You physically have three things that play out this upper architecture.
Okay, so one of the things I can pick out that I think we could align on is the idea that humans are not only subject and object. There's a third thing, or there's something
Yes.
else.
So the idea here is that we're trapped in cycles because we only see it as one or the other. The third part is what creates form, right? It creates the whole image of what we actually are. The problem is that we're looking at a 2D version of a 3D thing.
Okay, I like this. Okay, good, good. It's funny what we just did, that we had to abstract up to another level to get, at least for me, to be able to get some sort of understanding. But I
But
think
you
that
see, but I want to point that out because I just said that when we have the whole picture, we can put together the information that we need to really see what's in the center of it.
okay
But if
now
you ignore these other elements, you don't have the ways to pivot that you need to have the conversation.
no, absolutely, absolutely. And then okay, I want to go back to the objective, the question that I felt like was crucial earlier. Given the objective world, how does subjective experience relate to it? And then hopefully we can ground it into something more, let's say, practically applicable, or in psychology, or we can talk about emotions. I feel like many people understand emotions, and um, Okay, sorry. Let me say one more thing, and then maybe hopefully go back to that question. The thing about subjective experience, though, is that we treat it as if it's objective. Like I treat your emotions usually as if they are real, regardless of what I'm thinking, right? So like,
That's a courtesy, though. You don't have to do that.
well, you don't have to treat anything as objective, right? But the fact, but this goes back to the pragmatic element of your metaphysics, right? It's like it works. The fact that I treat your subjective experience as objective. Like it's a reality. It's not something I can't just think away your emotions, right? You know, and when societies function on the idea that consciousness is an objective reality, things work well. Like if I treated you like an animal, you can debate the consciousness of animals, right? But like if I minimized your consciousness and treated you as if you were not a conscious being, we just wouldn't talk. Like we wouldn't, we wouldn't be friends. It wouldn't work out that way. So what do you think about that?
So the idea, so we're really just talking about empathy. Like there's a level of like, so this is the chaos and order element that goes into this like thing of like what makes humans different. Well, our ability to be empathetic for other people's emotions, to be aware of other people's thought processes at a level, is our responsibility as humans in order to build community. And how we do that in a way that helps people instead of hinders them is important. Because I believe there's an idea when we talk about like the, not to be like make something bigger than what it is, like this is the first example that pops in my head, the whole no child left behind thing. I believe there's an element of competitiveness that's been removed from community because of an emotional empathy that has hindered us in other areas. And so we're always balancing how we handle emotions on at scale. And I think the bigger thing here is that we haven't properly taught everyone how to handle their emotions individually. And so we had to overcompensate in how we handle things in a communal level. If everybody was well aware enough of themselves and their emotional state and had the tools for dealing with them personally, then the community element could be less about handling emotional damage or emotional burden and more about us just building better things for us to live better lives. So I think the element is that we first attach how people think, then we attach how people feel, attack how people feel, and then we can properly start building systems that are functional once we have everybody to a cohesive state. But because we've never been willing to stop everything to make sure people are good, or at least set up the places to start cleaning, getting people through that process. Like we do have like therapy and things of that nature, there are in place, but they haven't seemed to be efficient at helping people. But then when you realize it's just a process, that it takes time, and that our ability to navigate that is part of the whole thing of bring us figuring out what unity looks like. How do we facilitate these different environments so that everybody is emotionally considered but not pandered or pampered?
Yeah, yeah. That balance is crucial. And one of the things I thought about as you were talking is another manifestation of the subject object dichotomy is this a manifestation? I don't know. As you were talking, I was thinking of the difference between thinking and feeling, or the difference between rationality and emotions. I, I guess if you
This is
assume,
between the heart and the mind.
okay, so it's not necessarily the subject object dichotomy. Then it's something else. But it came to my mind. If you think of like, now I'm thinking how the layperson understands emotions. Like a lot of people think of, they separate thinking and feeling, they separate rationality and emotions, and then they separate like reason and instincts. And so that dichotomy to me is somewhat associated to what we've been discussing. But I hear it so many times in relationships where particularly, the man is more rational and the woman is more emotional, and the man is always like, you always think so emotionally, you always think with your feelings, you're so instinctive, like you have to be more rational and reasoned. And this is just my perception of some parts of our culture where we've like demonized emotions, where it's emotions do nothing but inhibit communication or understanding. And it's like, look, they can do that at times, but guess what? Someone who's hyper rational and is only thinking and has no notion of good or bad or suffering or pain or pleasure, that's also very pathological. You know, like you likely can't empathize without, well, it depends on how you define empathy, but one of the ways that we come to understand other people is by assuming that they have emotions that we have, and then we you know, like your emotions are, they're very sophisticated systems that evolved over a very long time to bias you to act and perceive the world in a very in an adaptive manner given certain triggers or stimuli. And so they do so much for you, but I feel like we've we've just got the balance wrong in many regards. And I see it particularly in relationships, particularly when it comes to men and women trying to understand each other. So, a testament to your balance, your idea of there having to be balance. I agree.
I think that so. When I talk about the relationship thing, I think a lot of times we miss this element of relationship. So I believe that we're mirrors for each other, right? So the people that we attract in our life carry the elements that we either need to embrace more or fully let go of. And so a lot of times when we talk about our love relationships and our romantic relationships, your partner is most likely embodying the side of yourself that you ignore the most. And that's why you're attracted to them, because you're attracted to what they are able to embrace that you're still afraid of at some psychological level. And so a good relationship is where two partners help each other grow in the places that they need to grow to be more whole as themselves. So you ever see them people that get together and it's like, oh, they're actually acting more like themselves now. That's really what that means, is the relationship is balanced well. And it's not about the emotional or the logical thought being more important, but it's about finding situations that allow you to see the value in both. And this is where we talk about balance and doing things that create balance in your life, is that you can put yourself in situations that force you to see the value in both sides of the argument. And it's up to you whether or not you're mature enough to accept those lessons, or you reject those lessons and create that thing as an enemy. So a lot of people in their relationships, they're like, oh, well, my partner's so like this and I wish they were more like this. I try my best in my relationship to see what my lady is talking about. Not in the aspect that I feel like what she's saying. I don't try to make it seem like, oh, she's trying to say I'm wrong or this or this or that. Like, no. What do you see that I don't see? If I'm in a relationship with you, I'm in a relationship because I trust your intelligence, your ability to see. And a lot of people, it's like, I don't understand this element of why are we in a relationship if we can't do that? If we're not able to, one, hold each other accountable, and two, take constructive criticism without hating a person, what are we doing? Like, how are we able, because I don't believe in having relationships that don't help me grow. If we don't have, like, to me, every conversation is war. I get that from the whole laws of power. Like, every conversation is war. Every interaction is a battle in a sense. Not in the sense that we're fighting or there's a disagreement, but there are ideas that are being chopped apart. There are concepts. They're a part of my reality that is either growing and thriving, is being fed, or is being destroyed. Because what are we? Generators, operators, and destroyers. We generate realities, we operate within them, and we destroy things that don't match up. That's the whole us being God thing played out. And so just really understanding those different principles and being able to institute them in a way. And that's why I said it's just about tools. Like, you'll see how I jump from one phrase or another to kind of not really facilitate, but to create the lens for which I'm pressing things at. And I understand it just enough to, all right, this is the quote that grounds in that principle. This is the principle that grounds in that. And so even with the idea of like understanding why the subject object thing is bad, is because, like, all right, if we live in a 3D reality, in order to fully observe something within this reality, we need three parts. You're not going to observe anything in this reality with two parts. You're going to get a partial view of it because you're going to be missing something that's necessary to fully observe it. That's why numerology is so important, because we understanding, okay, I'm dealing with something that's in this plane. This is a three plane, or this is a three element. I know that it needs this much, or it's a four element. I'm in a 4D. I need four parts. Okay, so you got the mind, body, spirit, and what else is the fourth part? You see what I'm saying? Like, there has to be things that come into play. There's a reason. So what I think is, I don't believe that humans were wrong. I believe that the information that we have, that we get from ancestry, is there because it had some element of truth. I talk about that a lot. So if we have numerology and they say that things are in these systems, and then we have these dimensions that are numbered, and we have these solar systems that are numbered that match up with the numbers that have definitions, why not correlate the two? So in a relationship, if we're talking about a dichotomy, one and two in a relationship, this is two things. That's yin and yang. These things need to be opposite, and the opposite of those things reveals the power in the center of those things. That's the way that double things work. So an objective and subjective reality are meant to be a lens for us to understand the depth of both of those things more, not to decide which one is more important than the other. They're supposed to be balanced.
Yes, yeah, yeah, and that's maybe that's one way to think of the third missing piece that you mentioned before. If someone is only concerned with the subjective realm and the objective realm, the relationship is the third element. It's the
You see what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah, and I think again maybe finally going back to that question of the nature of that relationship. One of the things, and I've said this in past videos, I appreciate about you is that you think the nature of that relationship should be pragmatic, you know? And again, that's one lens that I agree with, but I feel like maybe that's a good way of construing like one of the bigger questions of our time, at least from the different like podcasts and books I'm reading, things I'm listening to. It's like we used to, this might not be accurate, but
Go for it.
maybe it's as if we all used to think that there was one objective reality and we disagreed about subjective stuff, you know. Like maybe in politics, from my lens, things didn't used to be as polarizing, and at least that's how it's felt in my experience. But like now objective reality is up for grabs. It's like you could imagine where, again, I've mentioned this before. I gotta stop saying that because different people might be listening to this, so I should just like rattle it off as if it's new for the first time. But
No, make them go watch the videos.
so you and I think can have great conversations in part because we have a lot of shared beliefs. So in some sense, we have a large subset of objective facts that we agree on. And these words are messy, right? Like, are beliefs facts? Like, can beliefs be true or false? Like, I'm not trying to get into that, but we essentially have a big foundation of objective facts that we agree are actually true. And so we don't have to talk about those things. And so we could springboard from that source of truth to all these other things and then play with different frames and different ideas, right? And I feel like our culture in America in the West was like that for a time, for better or worse, you know. But it's like now that amount of shared beliefs or objective facts is decreasing and dwindling, and maybe a compensatory move is that people are becoming more isolated and more fixated on their subjective realm because there's no it's, I guess there's still that yearning for wholeness, and so here I am using the subject object dichotomy as I'm criticizing it, but it could be helpful to eventually get to a point to where we understand that yes, there's an objective world, yes, there's a subjective world, but there's the relation between the two that we perhaps should attend most to. You know, like I felt like earlier I was criticizing people who elevate the objective realm over the subjective realm. And you could also say that there's criticism for the other side where, like you mentioned, you know, someone who is only focused on their subjective experience and have no bearing for the social environment or the physical environment, right? Like some of those people
That's
are,
what we call delusional.
that's a delusion, right? That's psychosis. So it's like there's got to be a balance, and maybe the proper balance is something like attending to the nature of the relationship between the two. And again, I think that pragmatism, I don't know if you know this, but the formal philosophical school of pragmatism, like one of its founders was also the founders of psychology. You know, William James is an American philosopher, and so it's like it's something there, you know. And he also was very interested in better understanding human nature from a foundational standpoint, and not necessarily just accepting the subject object dichotomy on its face, right? Like you mentioned before, how many people are given ideas essentially by their culture, right? Like you're raised a certain way, you're born, and then people are talking about certain things, and people use certain concepts and certain ideas, and it's like, well, as long as it works, you kind of just pick it up, and then you start going with it. You
If it
never
ain't broke,
really
don't fix it.
ask the question, right? And but there's something to be said about that, right? Like I'm sorry, this is a long rant, but I always think about this example. I like to work out and I'm trying to get yoked and swole. And so I eat protein. Why do I eat protein? Because someone said eat protein to get big, right? Like if you were to ask me, well, how does eating protein build your muscle? I could not explain that to the physiological bio, like the cellular, all the way down to the deepest level. Like I have no idea. You know, I just do
Protein
it.
good for muscle. I lift weight, drink protein.
Exactly. And so the pragmatic element of like not being naive, it's like it has to work, you know, and you keep doing what works. It's like I love that, but it's also like I don't want to necessarily disparage. It is really funny though, because but the way you characterize it is accurate. It's like, all right, does this work or not? You know, like I don't care why I'm putting up a Christmas tree. I don't care why I'm doing all of these weird, festivals and spiritual rituals and initiations. Like we
Does
just
it feel
it
good?
work. It feels yeah. So
But that's most people
yeah,
though. And
yeah.
I think that's the part that we fail to realize. And I think that brings in the point I wanted to bring up is that what I noticed in society is that because we've ignored this element for so long, the internet and social media has created this ability for us to create silos where we found finally have a habitat for people that share our subjective reality. And so what we're seeing in the world now is you're seeing people tribe up into collectives that share subjective reality. These are like influencers and their followers where they all agree on the same things, the same subjective view of the objective reality and opinions of people, things that they do. And so what I think is gonna happen is that we lived in the objective reality for so long that we're traumatized by it. So we're bouncing into a subjective reality, but we're slowly seeing how delusional that is. That's what we're seeing in society now. Where we have all these people that are like influencers and they come in the real world and they're upset because people might not know who they are or whatever it may be. And so it becomes this thing where slowly, I believe in pendulum swings. So we've been all the way through the objective reality and we're swinging over to the subjective reality. And we're like, this is a little strange and we're going to balance right out in the middle somehow. And I believe that's what we're seeing in society right now is that we're going to go very, very deep into subjective reality. A lot of people are going to start leaning into their personal beliefs and ideas. That's what we see with the spiritual movement and its inclinations of everybody doing the self work and the self journey, shadow work, and all of that is about embracing your subjective reality in a psychologically therapeutic way. And what I'm hoping happens and what I'm trying to facilitate with what I'm doing, the whole point of the Players Collective is to be a node for that change and building it in a way that where it brings people in, it helps them do that work that they need to do, and then it now turns them back into society in a way that helps them facilitate what we need to build as far as the unification process. That's really what I'm doing on the back end that I just don't really talk about as much. But the whole point of the Players Collective is for it to blend back with the conscious collective or the human conscious collective. I'm just building a node that I believe needs to exist in the system. I put a name to it and a gimmick to it, but I'm just trying to plug into the system that's already there.
I wish you the best of luck in that in that endeavor, man. And I think language is so helpful. You know, like that sounds very random what I just said, but you, like you said, with the Players Collective, using words to label this set of very complex phenomena and patterns that are occurring is useful because then we can just communicate about that. Like, you know, you don't have to say everything that's going on with it. You could just say the Players Collective, and like, oh, I know what that is, you know, and then other people will know what that is, and it's so useful. And I wanted to relate that back to just the spreading of ideas, and I get, and to some degree, if I take your pendulum metaphor, a swing back into the subjective world, you could also think of it as the collapse of the objective world. And there has been such an emphasis on language in our culture when it comes to like cancel culture. You know, you can only say certain things, you got to be politically correct. You know, the I brought this up before, but I'm very interested in gender ideology and gender dysphoria and how that impacts our politics and our institutions, where, you know, it was two sexes or genders. Again, language, like, what's the difference between gender and sex? Why do we have a different word for this thing, you know, compared to this other thing? And then now there are different pronouns, you know, and there's 50 pronouns, so there's 50 genders. Well, actually, there's, you know, gender is a social construct, so really gender is however you're feeling and whatever you identify with. So, you know, at that moment, and it can change from moment to moment, which is why some people are gender fluid. It's like, bro, it's a collapse. It's a collapse back into, or not back in, maybe back into actually, but different
I would argue
different
that
topic.
it is a
Okay.
collapse back into unity. So I think that's why I don't have as big of an issue with it as everybody else has, is because at the end of the day, as much as I don't like this defensiveness that comes with that. We haven't been allowed to properly, I'm gonna say this and it may or may not get me canceled. We haven't been allowed to properly integrate LGBTQ logic into our society because it comes with the disdain of, well, y'all didn't want to accept that, so fuck y'all. And it's like, bro, like, I don't want to be gay. That's cool. But I understand what you're getting at with this whole gender fluid thing from a spiritual perspective. But you can't want to take, I think the problem is that in the process of seeking unity, we want to make spiritual things and logical things the same thing, and it's not. Some things logically make sense, some things don't. Some things spiritually make sense, but don't logically make sense. There's a separator there, and our ability to understand that in unifying those things, that we still need those categories in order for us to. Let me put it this way: to explain a thing, you have to separate it. In unity, they are the same thing. But as we seek to explain these separations or these specifications, that's the only time we need separation. If I want to identify something as outside of me, I have to separate it. But at the end of the day, these things are all an aspect of the same thing. And it makes it interesting how we communicate that, because there's so much defensiveness around wanting to be what you are or what you consider yourself to be, that you're not able to communicate about the entirety of what's going on. So, like you said, the objective reality has been destroyed in order to protect this subjective reality that people are trying to build confidence in. But in actuality, they need to coincide and exist in the same space.
So you mentioned unity, and of course the opposite of unity is multiplicity or diversity, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you saw, I wonder if I would actually flip your description of unity there, because one of the things that's concurrent with the with gender ideology is also DEI, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And what's meant by diversity in that slogan often is a tribalism, a an emphasis on reducing the individual consciousness to an identity group. And it's not even all identity groups. It's usually like race and
Generalize.
gender. It's usually like race, gender, sexual orientation. But it's like, I mean, I like anime. I'm in an anime. Why can't I be? Why can't that be an identity group? You know, we are doing a podcast right now, so there are a group of people who do podcasts. Like, that's also an identity group. It's like, so. But anyway, to put
That's
that
where
as
it gets messy at, and that's why it's like,
exactly.
so that becomes the line that you're really asking. The question that you're asking is, okay, so there has to be a line at how much diversity that we accept, but there needs to be some diversity to make sure that we're getting proper metrices. So the question becomes is how much do we need to diversify to proper facilitate the greater whole? At some point, we're just trying to facilitate things that don't need to be facilitated because they could be categorized in a way that fits a bigger umbrella. So, and then becomes a thing where it's like, okay, so this is what cosmology is. This is why we think about the whole angel thing. Like, why is there cosmology? Why are there specific angels that have dominion over different sectors? And why is it separated? Like, why are there months, days, years? Why are there certain, like, there's an angel for every hour. There's an angel for every day. There's an angel for every month. So when we understand that logic and that metaphysics, what it's teaching us about how this reality works is that there needs to be a hierarchy system, and there needs to be things that are responsible for each of these different categories to report up to the whole. So yes, we don't, there need this is what we try to build these systems, but because there's disunity in the pockets, it doesn't work. You see what I'm saying? Or because the pockets aren't properly, say we like, it's about properly allocating resources. That's the issues with our system. Everything in our system, and that's why I tell people, I don't believe the world is bad, it's just mismanaged. We have a system that's not properly allocating resources. That I understand. And I understand the identity of people trying to associate with bigger groups to better understand their particular issues or constraints that they're having. But the way that we're doing it, it just keeps anything from being solved because, all right, well, we get approved for the money for the African diaspora. Now it's like, well, we feel like we need more money because we live in America, and then the Africans need more money because we need houses, and then everybody's needs are different. And so instead of us being able to say, hey, I need this and they need this, we all need this, we're arguing over, well, I think I should get more. This is the thing that's crazy here. It's like we're not able to actually just say, hey, I need this in order to survive. They need this in order to survive. Give everybody what they need. We're not able to do that because there's this weird thing, well, I don't think they deserve that, or this or this or that. That's the difference there. The culture and the separations, the disunity amongst these different sects causes it to not. That's the thing. That's the human problem. If we're very being honest, how do we figure out how to properly separate and then allocate? We need to separate and allocate in a proper way. And in some cases, we need to lower the amount of separation in order to get clarity on what the actual issue is. Absolutely. And then the truth is, a lot of times, if we want to take it a level deeper, we're not cleaning up our own neighborhoods enough, and that's the problem. So we have the proper resources allocated to us, but we're mismanaging them, and we're not willing to be accountable for that. And that's the part that slaps a lot of people in the face, is that if you really sat down with you and did the numbers on how much money you have coming in and what your responsibilities are to stay alive and make sure your family has food, how much of your expenses go to bullshit?
And this is so crucial. Like, and I think
we got to be honest, bro. Like, we got to just be honest, because at the end of the day, bro, when I sit down and I look at how much money I make, the money that's not there, I know where it goes. I smoke weed. I eat good, nigga. I eat good as fuck, nigga. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't eat noodles. I don't eat nothing. I don't know. But I could do better. And my willingness to be accountable for knowing that I could do better is why I can't complain. I'm not nowhere near being as efficient as I could be with what I have. And if I'm willing to be accountable for that, I can't bitch until I'm at least using what I got. And that's why I don't like having this whole, oh, what's wrong with the world? We be bullshitting. I'm not going to be, I can't even have that conversation eloquently. We be bullshitting, bro. If we really want to have a conversation, what's wrong with the world? It's not a structural problem. It's us. It's the individual. Lack of accountability, lack of personal discipline, lack of, and you could argue that it's lack of financial intelligence, but bitch, you got to learn that. Ain't nobody make you learn financial intelligence. The fuck? If you don't want to learn it, you got to pay for it. That means you need to have at least enough money to pay for somebody to manage your money. What are we talking about? If you can't pay for it, you got to learn it. You can't be mad because don't nobody want to give you something for free that you ain't willing to go get for yourself. And you don't got to figure it all out. You just need enough to get the money to pay the nigga to do the rest. And now AI ain't but $20. You ain't got no excuse. You can get a financial advisor for $20. There's no excuse. We aren't trying. And that's my actual, that's if we have one, we want to have a real conversation about how I feel. I think humans don't try. I think we full of shit. I don't think we want better. I think we want somebody to give it to us. We don't want to work for it. And because we don't want to work for it, we don't have it. We could make it this psychological conversation, this metaphysical, we're oppressed and all. No, bro, we bullshit.
So,
We can cut this out if we need to, but I just had to say that because at the end of the
no,
day, bro, it's like, bro, what are we doing? I'm so frustrated because it's like we sit down to have these conversations to help people, and you listen to their complaints, and you see exactly what's not happening. I can do it for myself. I can go down the line of what's wrong with my life, and I can tell you exactly where I fuck up. I'm emotionally intelligent and present enough to do that, and I work on those things. I know the things that I don't need to do, and when I go do those things, I ask myself, am I going to really do this again, knowing this is the thing that I don't need to be doing? Yes, you are, because this is what you want to fucking do. Do. You see what I'm saying? And it's us.
yes, no, agreed completely, man. It's shadow repression.
Yeah,
It's
you
shadow
can call it a
repression,
trauma
man.
response if you want to. I could agree with that, but when are we gonna work with it, and what does that look like?
We need to get one of our more, I hate to use political terminology, but I think it's fitting. We need to get one of our more liberal fraternity brothers in here to counter me. I don't want to include you. I don't know your political persuasion, but when I was at this master's program, psychology is like 90% liberal. The humanities in general is like 90%. Humanities and social sciences is like 90% liberal. And so let me back up a little bit. I think that one dimension of tribalism is political ideology. That's pretty self-evident, right? And so for many people, politics has elevated to have so much meaning and value in their lives, particularly to have like my side be right and to demonize the other side as a place to put all the contents of their repressed shadow, essentially. Like I think that there's so much shadow projection going on because people are afraid to look at their own bullshit to echo your sentiments. But anyway, so politics is huge. I think it's bigger than it needs to be, but that's just how it is in our culture right now, right?
That was gonna be my point. Is like I don't. You say like parties. I don't. I wouldn't. I don't even understand the separations. I don't try to. But
Mm-hmm.
why?
Mm-hmm.
Aren't we supposed to be working together?
Well, it's like, look, right? There is a psychological explanation for, let's say, in America, the differentiation into, let's say, being on the left and being on the right. So people who are on the right are, there's one personality paradigm that many people know about. It's called the Big Five, and it breaks your personality into openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And those are very reliable and valid traits that predict a whole bunch of things, and so it's very well documented. Um, Conservatives are higher in conscientiousness and lower in openness, and then liberals are the opposite of that. And the thing is, personality is normally distributed throughout the population. So you have most people who are here, and then you have people who are on the extremes. And from an evolutionary standpoint, what does that mean? Well, it means that there's trade offs to being everywhere along that distribution for each dimension. It's like, how open should you be? So, like, you're a relatively open person, right? Like, you're interested in ideas, you can jump from concept to concept. You probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but when it comes to being creative, you're a dancer, right? You're creative in many other endeavors. I'm sure like novelty is something that you can appreciate, and some level of spontaneity and unpredictability, right? Those are open people. It's like, how open should you be? Well, I don't know. Sometimes it's good to be really open. Sometimes it's not good to be really open. Sometimes you need a little bit of stability and predictability and discipline and put things in proper order, right? And so, okay, all of that to say that personality variation seems to have been an adaptive evolutionary product that's good for the species because you don't know how open or conscientious or extroverted you need to be as the future is unpredictable. So, okay, coming back to politics. What does that mean? That means that there has to be an ongoing dialogue between these different personality combinations. People on the left are, let's just pick one example, pick the border. It's like people on the left are more open. And so they're often they want to let more people and more ideas and more new things into the country. And it's like, yes, there are definitely positives to be had with that, right? But you also see the opposite conversation where it's like, well, many historic instances have happened where new people go to a country where the local population is not immune to the diseases that these people bring, and then they wipe everyone out. So it's like you you there's no perfect answer about how open or how closed the borders be, so it has to be an ongoing conversation. So all of that to say that, like, I think there is some justification to separation into parties and ideally having a dialogue and a process to enable change. But I think we care. I think from a cultural standpoint, we care too much about it. And maybe that's valid, right? Maybe it's because the political system's broken and people have to care about it. It's like, well, if things were working relatively fine, maybe people wouldn't need to feel like they need to pay attention to it. It's also a social media dynamic going on here. But
So
I feel.
what I see that
Go
I
ahead.
think is an issue with that system. I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but I just wanted to cut in here. So what I see with this system is when you look at it, basically what I'm saying is the reason why it doesn't work is because we're more focused on the balance of how many people from what side are in the house and directing decisions than to making sure the house is just balanced and everybody's opinions are heard. It becomes less about us actually making sure everybody's heard and more about trying to take control of it so your opinion is ruling factor.
I
And
think.
so the way that we operate politics to me is just toxic. It's like, bro, what are we doing?
Well,
If it's supposed to be a balanced system for everybody to be heard, put people in place that understand what people want to hear, want to be said, and then make sure everybody's heard, and then figure out what's the only logical way for this to work. And every time, everybody won't have what they want, but there be a way to facilitate what's needed first, and then we could get to a list of wants, and we create a system for it. The same way we have old and new business in our meetings and Robert's Rules of Order. That I don't feel like, and that's what's so frustrating is because the systems are there. We don't have to make new things. This is my whole thing. Everything that we have in place is cool. The separation, all of that is cool with how it is. But our integrating it back to the community aspect of like how it functions together is shit. The actual like the actual systems are it's more about manipulation and trying to control the facets that are there than actually having any balance at the top. At the bottom, our understanding is that this thing works because all of this stuff is in place for it to be balanced. And then you go into those rooms that where the balance is supposed to exist, and it's more separated than anywhere else.
and
Like these are supposed to be people that are agreeable and able to agree and be fluid in their thinking. And what it is we've chosen rigid leaders because we want people that can stand up for what we want to happen instead of people that are actually able to be malleable in how that solution comes to be.
you know, okay. Here's one thing that I would say. For example, like one of the things that the left has to solve is basically establishing its borders in terms of what it means to be the left. So I think one of the reasons that Kamala Harris lost in the previous presidential election was because she was trying to appeal to too many disparate entities within the left, right? So you have, you know, people advocating for minorities, then you have people advocating for religious minorities, and you have people advocating for immigrants, and then there's LGBT, like we said. And by the way, LGBT is not one thing. Like they have their own multiple things too, and it's
You
like
get what I'm saying?
black people aren't just a monolith, right? It's like okay, there's so when you it's like the more open and agreeable you are, the more you want to try to cater to, kind of like you said, hear all the voices. But again, you only have so many resources, and this goes back to what you were saying before, and how like a lot of this can be framed as a resource allocation problem. It's like, if you have 1,000 different groups that you're appealing to, well then, and you only have $1,000, everyone gets $1. It's like, is that good? Like, I don't know. Everyone's equal. Like, everyone's equally poor. Cool. Like, that's I get that. If that's your outcome and if that's what you're seeking, then cool. But it doesn't seem very productive over the long run. But to try to
The
okay,
problem is, oh, wait. Okay. Maybe I'm sorry. I'm not gonna cut you off again. Go ahead.
just to try to zoom out. I don't know how interested you are in speaking about politics, but to try to talk about the politics as it is juxtaposed with culture, it's a cycle. It's a dynamic, right? The people who get into office oftentimes are voted in by the people who, like, to some degree they find some appeal in them, right? And so it's like, to the degree, I guess, that you were saying that the politicians are rigid in their thinking, and no doubt some of them are. I think some of them are more open, but again, that's some reflection of the broader culture. And so I would view a lot of what's happening as a deeper problem. Again, going back to the psychological issue of repressing your shadow. It's like, I would imagine that to some degree politicians can't like just do the work, or just be agreeable and have civil conversations, because what if a large portion of the culture doesn't want that? Like, what if it's, instead of the political system being one where everyone's heard, well, what if the culture is too busy projecting their shadow to the other side, and it's like, well, they shouldn't be heard because the left is all evil and filled with Marxists, or the right is filled with white supremacists, so we shouldn't open the table up to white supremacy, like I think again, the individuals, which collectively make up the culture, but I think many individuals just have a distorted view of whatever the other side is, and okay, I'll pause there.
So basically, what you're saying is that we took a natural system. When we look at government and its right, it's following the same cosmology that we're talking about with the mother and this whole system, right? But what we've allowed is we've allowed humans to amend how these positions work over time. This is what we see all the time with the amendment to the Constitution and things of that nature. Now, granted, I'm not saying that the Constitution didn't need to be amended. What I'm saying is I don't believe that I believe that we're not properly updating our system. And so the issue is that the system has become so malleable that it pretty much is human logic. It's no longer a system's logic. It's an individual. Each node, I think about it, the left and the right can choose what issues they want to fight for. So technically, the right could pick up a left issue if they feel like the left isn't serving it well enough and try to get their people over to their side. It's not really a functional thing. Like we're not asking people to actually decide what their values are. We're asking people to decide who panders to their values the best.
Ooh, hold on, say that again. You might need to unpack that. I think that was pretty good.
So, like, for instance, the left and the right aren't standing for particular ideals. They're pandering to whatever groups they feel like they need to pander to get them to vote to win. So there's no actual like honor in their ideals and what they're fighting for and what their positions are. They're positioning their ideas based off of the numbers to win the votes. It's not about, you see what I'm saying? Like there's no actual structure there. The right and the left are acting like individuals instead of nodes in the system. They're not properly balanced.
I, I I think another thing that's happening here, you mentioned ideals, is that we just don't know what our ideals are. I feel like, again, going back to, as we discussed before, how perhaps there was a time where we had more objective facts that we all agreed on. I think that ideals used to be part of those objective facts that we all agreed on. And so
That's why we have the concept of common sense.
exactly, like that's what common sense is, right? Many people, when they can't articulate a reason for an idea or something, they're just like, it's common sense. And that's not very, like, it's not very helpful, right? Because because common sense, what's the cliche, right? Common sense isn't so common. And if you can't articulate something, it's likely that it might get lost. Like
Or it doesn't exist in the first place. It was only available for that instance. And you created a reality out of something that was temporary.
that too. It could be, that too. And um, so now, instead of you could imagine a world where we all agreed on the ideals, and what we had to talk about was more surface level details about how to attain those ideals. And what are the different strategies and tactics that could be used, and that's less reflective of individual values and more reflective of just what life experience, how people think, different personalities, right? It's not necessarily like you're an evil person because you're pursuing that ideal, as me, I'm good because I'm pursuing this ideal. It's completely different. If you and I both agree that we need to build more bridges for the city to facilitate more traffic flow or whatnot, we agree to build more bridges. Like, I'm not going to think you're a bad person because you're like, well, I think this 2-year plan is better than this, 18-month plan. It's like,
It
but
doesn't really matter.
we've collapsed. It seems to me that we can't agree on shared ideals, which maybe is in part a result of the loss of religion. And so we're trying to like make up our own ideals. And so I'm biased, so I think that the right is still relatively religious, and so, but I would understand if someone was like, well, actually, no, the right is increasing in anti-Semitism, and the right is becoming too, uh, yeah. Let's say I would understand if someone were to bring that criticism up. On the left, what I see is the ideal is essentially compassion, but we kind of mentioned it before, how if your ideal is compassion, it's kind of hard for you to also hold people accountable and talk about things like personal responsibility, right? Because that can come off as discompassionate and
Unempathetic.
unempathetic, right? Like, I feel like it's interesting. Let's kind of pause and reflect here, right? Like, I don't know if you were a little hesitant about like feeling like you might get canceled for that kind of rant you had on personal responsibility and um, accountability, but I can imagine how some people would feel like they might get canceled for saying something like that. And that's so interesting. That's telling of the culture, right? That's telling of like, well,
Yeah.
why is it that talking about personal accountability, personal responsibility, and discipline is like kind of taboo depending on the circle that you're in, right? And it's like, oh, well, we have
Because
so many.
everybody's already trying so hard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, man. I think
But
that's
I'm sorry, I ain't mean to cut you off. I
no,
just
you're good. And this is a big reason of why we're having these conversations, is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to figure out what's the uniting ideal. In the last video, we spoke about love as the uniting ideal, and we tried to flesh that out. And you and I both believe in the collective unconscious and the archetypes, and how these archetypal motifs are pointers to, if not the best ideals, good enough ideals that we could start with. Like, that's why these stories are still remembered, is because they have pragmatic utility, even if we don't understand it explicitly, right? Like, why is Snow White, or Snow White? Why are so many of the Disney movies, which are representations of older myths and fairy tales, still being recreated? Now, some recreations are better and worse, but still, like, it's like, why have some of these ideas and old stories lasted so long? It's because I think they point to something useful, and something about those ideas can be helpful in guiding us to figure out what uniting narratives and uniting ideals could be for us.
definitely. And I think this is interest in figuring out that, and what I've been even with the whole idea going back to like the objective and subjective thing, looking at it from the idea of the right and the left, like there still has to be this third point for it to structure into our reality well enough, and we don't allow for that in any way. And I think it's interesting because what do we have? I guess the liberal party would be that supposed balancer, but most of society disregards it as a factor. They're part of the conversation. We listen to their ideas, but we don't trust their ability to lead in how we think. And I think that's the result of what we're actually talking about here is that there's not comfort in the fluidity of that middle point. You see what I'm saying? Like people are comfortable with structure and people are comfortable with knowing that there's no rules. But trying to balance the two, people just don't want to think about it. They don't want to be responsible for it. They don't want to have to actively make those type of decisions. They rather it just be one way or the other. That's where a lot more people are comfortable. And it speaks to our psychological state where we haven't really balanced both sides of our thinking in a way. So we either prefer thinking one way or we prefer thinking the other. We're either creative or we're logical. You know what I'm saying? That's the same thing we talk about in relationships and why we have a hard time. And so what we think about is the reason why we can't unify as a whole is because none of us are at the point where unification is logical for us. We can't psychologically comprehend it in a way that's cohesive. Our understanding of the reality is too fractured for us to really put it together well. And I think that's what we've been doing as humanity and as society over the years is refining those ideals. But I think that we're at a critical mass point in human history where we've kind of covered everything. Like there's not a conversation or a way of thinking or psychosis that hasn't been researched at some level. Like yeah, there's some small offshoots, but generally we have an idea of how the path that most people are walking. And I believe if we took a second to pause with that information, we could build a system that facilitates the majority of what we experience. And we could build it in a way that where it could be able to pick up on these nuances that come in and facilitate them if they need to. And that's the issue with the system that we have is that it doesn't allow for new things, new nuances to come into the picture.
And this is a man. You said that you feel like our system is inadequately prepared to encourage and facilitate new ideas. Is that part of what you said?
Basically, it's not able to facilitate new paradigms. Anything outside of where the left and the right facilitate ideas, or where the masculine and feminine or the logical and creative ideas come in, there's not a real. But the reason why we have such an issue at the lower levels and at these different specific points is because there's such a variety of things going on, and we're not facilitating those things at the top. The things at the bottom aren't getting fed because the top overall system isn't even being considered well enough. Like things aren't flowing through the roots, so they're not getting to the branches.
I, in some sense, see it from the opposite lens, where I think that there's, I think that there has been an attenuation of seeking out knowledge and wisdom of the past, which is very similar to just saying there's been an increase in the blinding of oneself to tradition or to the discarding of tradition. And again, I hate to keep doing this, but in my experience in academia, like when I read psychologists and philosophers, I like to read, let's say, 1980s and backwards, um, and beyond that. When it comes to like neuroscience or biology or like the harder sciences, I'll try to read something more current. But at my stage, I just feel like, well, psychology is like 150 ish years old, a little less than that, 125, 150. With what we know now, there's a handful of ideas. I don't, not a handful, but there's like a dozen thinkers that are the most prominent out of the hundreds that have manifested in the discipline, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, maybe I should spend like 5 years studying those guys, like those people, like William James, like I mentioned, one of the founders of psychology and founders of pragmatism. Like, I should at least take a few months to just immerse myself in the way this guy thought as a founder of a field that still exists, right? But some
Yeah.
people are like, oh, well, he's outdated, oh, that's 150 years ago. Like, and the thing is, this, the way productivity works in a lot of these domains, this is something that Derek DeSola Price spoke or wrote about in a book called Little Science, Big Science. Think about this, right? Most of the scientists that have ever existed live today, right? And so it's like,
Yeah.
at first there were like, 5 scientists, and then now there's whatever, hundreds of thousands or whatever. But most of those scientists exist today because there's a flowering effect over time where knowledge and creation in the domain grows exponentially. And so to try to grasp a whole discipline, I was kind of tongue in cheek talking about it earlier, but to try to grasp a whole discipline, one, it's impossible, but two, you have to read. You would want to read. You would have to read mostly current stuff, you know. But there's this, for some reason, for me, I'm just like, well, the current stuff, it hasn't been like battle tested yet. It
Mm-hmm.
hasn't gone through that distillation process of like, okay, who today are we still going to be talking about in 50 years for their influences? And again, I'm trying to. There's a balance to be kept there, right? Like, you don't. You definitely want to stay aligned with what's going on currently, but me as a neophyte, I have this inclination to want to go back to like the first 25 years, the first 50 years, like, Freud, William James, Carl Jung. Like, why are these the people that when the layperson today thinks psychology, they think Sigmund Freud, they think Pavlov and his dog, like, why are those the common things that stick out? And that's where I want to go. But I feel like I'm in the minority of knowledge seekers, particularly in academia, where everyone else is like, you know,
Well,
focus on the present.
I'm gonna tell you the reason why it's like that is because we're fighting for relevance. In order to be financially sound in the field, you have to come up with something new. And you come up with something new if you're looking at what was, because the people that study what was have already made that new assumption based off of that. But what I think what we miss is, and why I say that now is so important, is because now I could put every writing from every philosopher from ever into a knowledge base and ask it what the conjoint point is. Like, we don't have to like figure that out as much. And then I could ask it how it proved that and what teachers had the most relevant input on there. Like, nowadays I go through with my I talk to the Claude or AI now, and I'll give it one of my concepts. And then I'll ask it to go find all of the philosophers in history that have ever talked on this subject and how they framed it. And ask, does my posit or does my idea fit within this framework? 9 times out of 10, it does, because we're all thinking with the same blocks of information. Now, our ability to see how those things correlate, we don't have to go spend 1,000 years reading it. Now, granted, if you find something interesting that can help you in building your proposite, I think that's the thing. Is like, I believe our job as humans is to pick up the knowledge that was there, integrate as much of it as we can, and then regurgitate it into something new. That's the cycle. And then eventually we'll end up coming with somebody's going to hit the gold on the head, and they're going to formulate it in a way that's functional. That's all we're looking for. Functional uses for it. So why are the Sigmund Freuds and the Carl Jungs and all those sciences work? Because they gave people something that was functional. And not only was it functional to use in real life, but they could use it as a building block to prove their ideas without having to go back and figure out everything that the person that came up with the logic did. And they'll be trusted because everybody trusts their understanding. And I think that's the thing when we talk about the scholars of the world, is that we have to understand that we couldn't even formulate the ideas we have without certain people's ideas. Like you said, like, the reason why our ideas build the way that they build is because I couldn't. I was able to move as fast as I was in knowledge because I didn't question what people established before me. Now, I do question the results of it. If I see something and I apply it in my reality and it doesn't work the way that they taught me that, I then begin to question it. And so it really just becomes a matter of, are you trying any of this shit? And how can you test it? What can you try? There's a certain level for you to test any information. Test it. See if it works in your reality. Add it to the category of whether or not it's just something that's situational or something that you haven't observed yet, or it's something that's consistent. And then figure out how to categorize. Like, that's why I consider, like, I have an aspect of the Players Collective that I don't talk about. It's going to be the traveling scholars. And it's going to be people that go around and find this different type of knowledge and figure out how to acclimate it. Some people do this. This is a thing that we do. And I think that's what I'm passionate about when it comes to information, is like, how do we really, who's interested in doing the work? Like, how do we really figure out what any of this is fucking work? Like, I know there's a lot of people working on it, but I don't think we've allowed enough creativity with how we approach scholarship. And that's why it's stagnant where we're at. It's way too logical.
Okay, you still got time, right? I got.
Yeah. How much more you need? I mean, I ain't in no rush. I ain't got nowhere to go right now.
Okay.
I need to clean up the house. Man, I'm cool.
Okay, let me just bring up this last thing, and then when that
We can
runs
have
its
a longer
course.
conversation today. It's cool.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Cool, cool, cool. Okay, so you mentioned that we need to get more creative with how scholarship is done, right? One of the cultural conversations I've been paying attention to is this idea of expertise and what it means to be an authority. So, let's see. With the internet and social media, many people can communicate to many other people in a very short period of time. Now, it's not obviously like you and I are doing these things. We've been doing this for a minute. My personal results have been like 5 people listen to my stuff, so it's not like that, right? But it's still way different compared to, let's say, if you were an expert historian, you had to go through all this schooling, and then you had to be able to write a book, find a publisher, or write papers, get peer reviewed, right? There's like so many barriers. Those barriers are really gone now. Information is just out there. And so now, okay, on top of that, many people in our culture struggle to trust institutions because they feel that they have been betrayed by institutions. Let's say with COVID, and people with the various elections and what's going on in politics, and the again with social media, so much of this is just out there now, where there's blatant lies and corruption and deception, and the medical institutions, academia, all of that. Okay, so now I think that the discussion is, or it has been for at least a year or so now, like, who should be listened to? Like should everyone be able to say anything to everyone whenever they want? Like, those are, it's like should there be mechanisms on the transference of knowledge and the flow of knowledge and information? uh, okay, I kind of threw some things out there. What do you think about any of that?
Really the question we're asking is, freedom of speech safe? Is it free for everyone to be able to share their ideas? I mean, we could argue no, because we think about people like Hitler that are influential in their speaking. And some people argue whether or not Hitler was a good or a bad person with his intentions. And I think that's really the conversation that we're asking. I personally, I just believe that we have to be comfortable with letting things go the way that they have to go. Our need to try to control and mitigate things past a certain point keeps it from growing and moving in a way that it functionally needs to. I understand the fear that comes in with the thought frame of letting things go the way that they go. There's an idea that a lot of people will like, well, if I could prevent it, I should. But if you can't prevent it, you should allow it to happen. That's kind of the line we're talking about here. Like, there's certain things that you just won't. In order for us to have a functional society, you can't prevent certain things from happening. You should be able to have things in place to prevent them from escalating past a certain point, but there should be an allowance for things to happen in a way to monitor it in a way that's innovative. You see what I'm saying? Like if we like we talk about we live in a the biggest issue that I believe that's like a one of the things I feel like is a hindrance for us for our growth is we don't want to be watched. We want privacy. Okay, well, privacy comes with the idea of somebody crazy being able to sit in a room and do some shit they ain't got no business doing because you don't want nobody to know what you doing, and you ain't doing shit. You know what I'm saying? And so it becomes this thing where it's like, if we could just monitor people in a not weird way and people be okay with it, and you just know not to do weird shit. And the question becomes, okay, well, who's judging what's weird shit? Well, you'd have to have an extremely open policy and only bother somebody if they actually hurt somebody. This is the issue here, is that you may have to allow for someone to be hurt before you could stop someone. That's the issue here, is that there's an aspect of, do you want to stop the crime before it happens, or do you have to allow the crime to happen in order to know that a person would do it or not? Because some people would think about a crime and never do it, and some people would do it as soon as they think about it. And it's impossible to know that buffer zone. And so, but this is the idea of embracing chaos within your order. There has to be a space for chaos. And if we can't allow that because we don't want to, because of our idea or perception of perfection, then we're just rejecting the way that things are. You see what I'm saying? Like, there is an aspect of chaos in the reality, and we can't eliminate that. We can mitigate it, but we can't eliminate it. And that's really the conversation we're having. It's like, well, how do we eliminate chaos? You don't. You mitigate it. You create good systems for managing it, and you pray. Like, what else? Because if that's the case, then we'd have to eliminate all entropy in nature, and that's impossible. Like, there's things we can't account for, and we have to accept that in our societies the same way we have to accept it about nature. And I think that's the part that we have a hard time.
Yeah, no, there's a constant dialogue, particularly with the social media uh, tech companies, about what should their rules be for monitoring online behavior.
Because
And
they're getting into data whether we want them to or not. The mics are on, the cameras are on, it's there, it's recording, the devices are all there, the network is there. What are you doing with the data? And so the problem is, instead of us addressing what they're doing with the data and coming up with systems for that, we've allowed them to hide that because they're making money off of it, and they're profiting off of something that probably is strange, because we won't just allow them to openly communicate about what they're doing.
yeah, I'm more so speaking about, like, so for example, have you heard of these terms like misinformation, disinformation,
Mm-hmm.
malinformation? I hate all of those words. It's like, are you lying or not? Like, is it true or fact? Like, or false? Like, I don't. What is going on here? But uh, I don't know exactly the history of those words, but I think some of them started to become more prevalent in the ether during COVID, because COVID was a new thing. Depends who you ask, but COVID was a new thing. No one knew what was going on. I think this was really a breaking point. Going back to talking about like expertise and authority, you had different experts saying different things, and so then what happened is that there was an appeal to different institutions and systems that weren't necessarily the experts. So you had many healthcare experts saying one thing, but then you had this political apparatus saying this other thing, and then claiming to be based on the experts. But it's like, and then this political apparatus would shut down these experts who are saying something, and it's like, oh, well, why don't you guys just have a dialogue? Like
Why
experts
can't
and
you talk
experts.
about
Why
it?
would you just talk about it? And so that kind of sparked a lot of skepticism, and then and so then these terms, misinformation, disinformation, and many social media platforms, including YouTube, would start like flagging things that people were saying, and it's like, okay, but who's kind of like you were saying, earlier, like, okay, but who's judging what's misinformation and disinformation? Like, and this goes back to the subject objective dichotomy. It's like, why can't why isn't it just the case that we have objective facts? And we all can just know and see what the objective facts are. And if you say something that isn't an objective fact is an objective fact, then that's wrong. It's not even misinformation, disinformation. You're lying. That's incorrect. Like, you don't get to be
I'm
at
gonna
this
tell you
table.
why.
That what's up?
Because the objective reality facilitates all the subjective possibility. So for every individual objective instance, a different subjective possibility is possible. So for instance, with COVID, everybody that got COVID's body reacts to it differently. So there is no objective fact to how this disease affects the human body. You see what I'm saying? And this is where the quantum thing comes in, is that we're not allowed to, objective fact can only work in that situation, because another situation could be different at that objective point, at that observation point. You see what I'm saying?
I think I
So
understand what you're saying. Yeah.
so the idea here is that the problem is we're trying to zoom in too close. We're not properly observing the system. The objective facts are usually above where we're looking at. And so we're arguing over sub-objective facts. Make sense? Truth is here. We're arguing the differences that is amongst that truth. This is the same thing I talk about with the left and the right. Like I believe the left is this, and you believe the left is this. Both of those truths exist within the confines of what the left is.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I
You see
got
what
you.
I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
my perception of the left is this, and your perception of the left is this, and say, for instance, you're on the left, so you see the left this way. I'm on the right, so I see the left from this perspective. Our perceptions of the left are different, and we'll argue that. That's most of the arguments we see with political people. Is like, well, I feel like the left is doing this, and well, I'm on the left, and I know we're doing this. And so that disconnect doesn't allow us to have any aspect of truth, because we're both arguing our perception of what the objective truth is, but we're viewing it from different positioning personally.
So the the truth is, let's say, the territory or the actual landscape, and everybody has a map, and everyone has different maps to some degree, but we are arguing the differences between our maps as if they are the differences between the territory. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
We're arguing our perception of the territory other than outside the actuality of it. So we both walk around the same place. Like you said, people's perception is different. So we perceive a different reality. We could go to the same places, do the same things, and perceive differently what's going on there. And because we attach to that perception, oh, I've seen that, I know. That's why a wise man knows nothing. You only know what you've seen, but you don't know the actuality of the thing. You see what I'm saying? And so our attachment to knowing is what keeps us from communicating effectively.
That's perfect, man. That's it. That's absolutely it, man. I had a conversation with some religious fundamentalists a while back, and that conversation bothered me so much. We spoke for like 7 8 hours, and part of the reason why it bothered me is because I thought I was operating as if sorry, I thought I was operating as if, well, here's my map. There's a territory out there. Here's my map. All I have is my map. I can't see the whole territory, right? So that's why I have a map. What's your map looking like? Like I thought that's the conversation I thought we were having. We're just comparing and contrasting maps. Like maybe I can update mine, maybe you update yours, fine, right? But they were like, no, this is the territory. There is no map. I'm talking about the territory. And it was just so difficult. Once I started to figure out that's what was going on, I was like, oh, I actually can't talk to you. Like, there's no way to translate. Like, if I'm talking about a map, but you're talking about the territory, everything that I'm saying then is like, you see what I'm saying? Like, there's no bridging that. And so, yeah, I agree
People
completely.
don't understand that they're looking at the interface, not the actual thing. That's the mind. That's why the mind, mentalism is a thing. The mind is reality. We have to understand that our perception of the world is through our minds, not through the actual what is going on entirely. Because your mind can only perceive so much of the information that's there. So you're missing something. Our inability to, this is why confidence and arrogance is a bad thing. Because your inability to accept that you missed something will keep you from seeing the actual thing. It keeps you closed off to what the entirety of it is.
Okay, so here's where I think it gets tricky. If you can only see through your mind, how do you know what the actual thing is?
You have faith in those things that you observe outside of what you understand. So you know what you see, and based off of your experiences, you know that there are things that operate outside of what you see. So in order for you to have a holistic view, you have to this is the whole darkness element. So what do you believe in the darkness? What is the ether? The ether is the things that are outside of your perception, and your acceptance of things being outside of your perception, and that quantum factor as a part of your reality is how you allow that to exist. This is how the whole thing of like, oh, 99%, every amount of your body is junk DNA. That junk DNA has a function. It's not junk, you don't understand it, or you don't have the perception to categorize it. But those things still exist within your reality. Even when we talk about physics, there is an element of the ether or the gravity. There are these principles that we have to add into the mathematics that we don't understand, but because we get these mathematics, we can identify that there is an external factor that's facilitating these mathematics to exist.
Hey, okay, yeah, no, I agreed and understood. I think I just use different language,
Verbiage.
which is fine, right? Different
Yep.
verbiage, yeah, because when people say actual, I tend to think that they mean more real, and so how do I want to talk about this? We said that already, right? People have different perceptions of the world. So the question becomes, well, what is the world? Well, we've kind of already alluded to it. The world is potential. Reality is potential. So what does that mean? That means that the your perception that is actualized, let's say your conscious experience, is real. The potential that you extract your perception from is also real, right? So they're both real. And that's, I think, what is tricky, and maybe what I need to flesh out more to articulate that could be helpful for people. So I work as a behavior counselor for clients, adults with different intellectual disabilities and psychiatric diagnoses. And so many of them are afraid of different things. They might be afraid, or they get anxious around different foods, around strangers, around medical appointments. Like, let's take a medical appointment example. I have one client who, no matter where we go, this individual just can't handle the clinic. Even if they haven't been to that clinic before, it's like they somehow know that, okay, sorry, let me also paint the picture. Again, severely mentally disabled, nonverbal individual, right? So it's like, how do you know that this is a clinic? But anyway, everyone else in the clinic perceives that clinic as like a place to get care. But this individual perceives the clinic as death, right? So the question becomes, what is the clinic? Well, it's both. It is both of those things. It's just so I don't want to say that my client's perception like isn't real, like, or it's like it's not that my client's perception isn't the actual clinic. It's like, no, it is the clinic. That's why the individual's having the experience that they're experiencing. So that's just my way of trying to, like, take seriously both. Yes, the clinic, there's more to the clinic than one individual can perceive. Absolutely. At the same time, what the individual perceives has just as much reality as the non-perceived elements of the clinic. What do
I
you
think
think?
that's a result of trauma, though. So the way I rationalize that is realizing that, okay, say someone had a bad experience at the clinic. So their perception of the clinic is only pain. So anytime they see a clinic, they are attached to the idea that this means pain. It's like a kid. You say, oh, yeah, you go to the kid and they pull your teeth. Not every time you think about going to the dentist, you think that the entire experience of the dentist is them pulling your teeth. You only go for pain until you go to the dentist and you have a good day. They wipe off your teeth and they give you a lollipop. You have a good day, and you have a dentist that's not doesn't have the gloves on, stretching your mouth out. They're kind, they're patient, they give you a good experience. But if you never have that alternate experience, or even if you do have that alternate experience, you don't trust it, you then attach psychologically to this thing being a bad thing. And so anytime it comes up, you now feel that way. It's the same thing when people talk about relationships. If you identify that the opposite sex is abusive to you, anytime you interact with that person, you're going to look for them to begin to be abusive in some way. And so even if it isn't their intention, people are accidentally abusive. We don't understand that when we're narcissistic, when we're being selfish, sometimes we don't always catch those things, especially if we don't understand the person that we're talking to and their perception of those interactions. And so a lot of times what you realize is that people are triggered by their attachment to their perception of a thing.
And I would then add to that the fact that a thing can lead to a traumatic perception in some people and not lead to a traumatic perception in other people means that the thing is both the source of trauma and not the source of trauma. It's like it's both still, you know, it's still potentially a place of pain and trauma and suffering, let's say the clinic. Or you know the opposite sex for some people, like if a woman has had repeated traumatic encounters with a man, when she encounters a new man in the future, it's like, yeah, it is true that this new man can hurt you. It's also true that they might not hurt you, and the same way, regardless of the trauma, in the first encounter. And I think that's why people get anxious with anything that's new. It's because there is the potential for pain and pleasure,
Both.
for both there, and so to say, I think that's something that our culture has to get a better handle on, is this idea of reality as potential. And to your point earlier, I think that makes things so much more easy to accommodate for other people's perspectives once you realize that, like you're saying, right, you don't mistake the map for the territory. You know that there's a territory and you only have a map, and you understand that other people have different maps, and none of you can get to the territory absolutely. What you can do is you can try to corroborate, and you could say, oh well, your map has this land feature and so does my map. Oh well, I'll increase my confidence in the validity of that land feature, but I'm still not like 100% certain. Again, like you said it so eloquently before, like, I can't remember how you said it, but is it Socrates who said he's wise because he knows that he knows nothing? But yeah, that idea that you're falling in love with your own ideas and attaching yourself too deeply to your knowledge for its own sake can be devastating and
Definitely.
create a lot of
And this is
problems.
like
Yeah.
so if you create something, right? Your creation is a child. If you coddle a child, what happens? It misbehaves. It becomes spoiled and rotten. Same thing with an idea. If you coddle an idea, you have a good idea and you coddle it, you protect it. And if it does no wrong and it can't be incorrect and it can't grow or be better, then you'll have a stagnant, spoiled idea. It's the same thing. Like these principles that we have for how things grow and how things work everywhere. They're not. This is why I like truths. Like there's certain things that work everywhere. You can apply it to anything, and the same way that it applied to that is gonna work here. You know what I'm saying? And our ability to be able to understand that truth works like that, it's more of a malleable, alive thing. Like we have to stop treating, and this is why I like the idea of personifying and storytelling, because it allows you to be able to personify anything. I can tell a story about any process, and in the process of personifying it, I bring it to life in a way that allows you to see it for what it is, and not for the stagnant thing that it's been labeled as. And that, I believe, is how we try to bridge that gap for people. Like, why do you think people love what's the movie with the where like you're watching her emotions? You know what I'm saying? Like, and
I
it's
know what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, like that type of shit. Like, even like Osmosis Jones for me as a kid made me like taking medicine because I understood what it was doing for me and why it needed. I understood that like when you see like Osmosis running out of fuel or whatever, like you see how it works. You see the Tylenol, it can't spray no more and it runs out, and you either take another one or you let the vaccine take over. these type of understandings and personifications of the inner workings of ourselves psychologically and whatever the fucking word is, you know what I mean? That works, you know what I'm saying? And that being ability to do that is, that was what's so important to me. And I think that's what we miss. That goes back to the whole inner child and the whole subjective reality thing, is like, if you can't you can't use your imagination for these principles in the subjective reality, you're going to make yourself too rigid. And you're going to continually have to break. And then that's now you're experiencing the ego death in every conversation, because every conversation is jarring for you, because you've created a rigid personality that's constantly broken. Why does the world hate me? Yeah, because you've attached to something that's not true. You can't. No one hates you. You have bad ideas. I'm sorry. Like, it is not saying that your ideas are horrible and that you're wrong and you're stupid, but you need to figure out a better way of communicating and attaching to those concepts.
That's it. I think that's. I think you got it, man. I think you solved everything.
I ain't solved everything, but I'm still figuring it out because it don't work yet. Well, it
What
works
am I
for me.
missing?
I'm perfectly fine. I'm cool, but it's like still translating it. It doesn't seem to always resonate, because there's this pushback of, like you said, people want, like, that's why I'm so big on attachment. Like, you being attached to how something is a big hindrance. Like, your inability to really see something, like you said, we have to be able to see. You have to be able to see yourself objectively. That's why the soul is important. I'll put it that way. Like, yourself, you are, your internal is subjective, but you need to be able to observe it objectively and see what it is for what it is, and be accountable for where it can grow and be better.
In some sense, that is the ego is a word that many people have used differently, but I think generally speaking, that's a good definition of it, right? Like your ego is that part of your consciousness that allows you to view yourself as another entity, right? Like you can you can observe your thoughts, which is weird. And your
You can
thoughts,
observe your habits too.
right. And it's like, well, that's you, but you treat it as some distant thing that you can also manipulate, which
You
is
can refine
interesting.
yourself. You can
Yeah.
chisel yourself.
Yeah. That's a good
That's why
metaphor. Yeah.
that's why I'm so big on the soul seat, and like understanding that, like, your body is clay. It's malleable. Your body, your physicality is malleable, and your soul is like the repairman that you never call. If the body is the temple, your soul is the repairman. You know what I'm saying? Your soul is the balancer. It's the energy that flows through this physical system. Whether you be your nervous system or whatever it may be, there is some, like, even if you think about the argument that it's your nervous system and electronical neurons firing in your nervous system is a shock from your spirit, the communication, the wiring. And so your ability to clean your nervous system and have a good, clear nervous system connecting to your, makes your soul clear, makes your mind work better. You see what I'm saying? If the signal isn't clear, then you can't act clearly on that. And so you're not refining yourself because your signal isn't clear. Some people argue that's the whole vegan thing. Your body's just not clean enough to work properly, so you're not understanding it.
Mm.
There's a disturbance in the frequency that your body is able to do. That's why even like doing a 3-day water cleanse and just letting your body actually clear out from anything you're putting in it usually tunes people a little better. Like understanding that your body does need clarity to operate, to work, to function. Like there's an aspect. That's why fitness is such a big thing. Can your body even move the way it needs to execute what it's here for?
All right, man. I think that's a good spot to end it.
Yeah, we had a nice little run. I haven't even looked at the Twitch to see what time it was, who popped in, but it was dope. I enjoy anybody that did pop in. We'll be posting it on YouTube at An Imperfect Journey, right? Is your page,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
yeah.
my
And so
YouTube,
that'd be the
it's my name
vibe.
actually. Yeah,
That's your name.
yeah. Solomon Thomas, YouTube channel. Yeah.
Okay. So, oh, it's all okay. Yeah, it's all. That's, I think we're tired, brother.
Yeah. Let's we'll wrap it up. But yeah, man, great conversation. Appreciate the time.
Definitely, man. Damn, we were here for 2 hours. I just went and looked at Twitch to see who had popped in Twitch at the end of the stream to see.
Nice.
And we did get a couple comments, a couple people views. So yeah, appreciate y'all for coming out. And yeah, have a good day, boss.
All right, man.